When it comes to printing white ink, there are really four major contributing factors. The first is the screen. You really want to have a tight tension, a mesh tension on the screen in order to lay down the ink on top of the shirt, versus if you're using a low mesh tension screen that had a lot of flex in it, you would allow that mesh as it's printed to sit on the shirt and more smash the ink into the shirt. So a tight mesh tension screen is important. The second is your emulsion stencil thickness. Now, the amount of ink that goes on your garment is directly oriented to how thick your stencil is. So if you're using a 1-in-1 coating method with a thin stencil, you're only going to lay a thin amount of ink down. During the printing process, it's physically impossible to lay down more ink than the thickness of your stencil when you're just passing one stroke across the screen. So what you want to do is you want to make your stencil thicker. You do this by coating 1-in-1, letting the screen dry, coating the outside of the screen one more time on the outside with the thick edge of the scoop coater, letting it dry again, and then coating it 1 or 2 more times depending on the stencil thickness that you want. The third is going to be the squeegee pressure and angle, and we're going to show you that later as we start printing. And the fourth is going to be the type of ink that you're using. You want to use opaque ink, but you don't want to use a real robust ink that's hard to work with. You want to use an ink that's going to be creamy, soft, and easy to use without having to reduce it, which then cuts down your opacity. So first, let's talk about mesh tension. We have a 110 mesh screen. Now when you're doing a white plate, you typically want to use a lower mesh, like a 110 mesh, 156 mesh if you want some detail, and maybe even an 86 mesh if you have just a block image. So this is a 110 mesh screen, that's what we're going to be using today, and we're going to measure our newtons. That's the tension of the screen. Now the newtons of your mesh on a good screen is going to be like at least 22 to 24, optimally maybe 25 to 28. 20 will work, but if you're down in the teens, you're going to have problems with the opacity. Now it's still going to print fine, but let me give you an example. We were at a trade show. The first trade show print that we set up is actually going to be the image that we're doing today. The first show was in, I think it was Fort Worth. The print looked beautifully. I did 2 passes, 1 hard stroke, 1 more angle stroke, and it came out extremely opaque without even having to flash it. We also thickened our stencil up, as we'll show later. 2 shows later, did the same thing using the same screen, the same stencil thickness, and the same ink, and we were not getting an opaque enough print to not flash it and then having to print it again. That was directly due to the mesh tension. Over the course of 2 months sitting in a hot trade show crate in a warehouse, that mesh really relaxed, and we went from 23 newtons all the way down to 14, and that's where we lost the quality of that image without having to flash. So this screen right here, this is a Newton meter. We're going to measure it, and this is looking at about 24, 25 newtons depending on the side of it. It's going to be very tight and optimal for printing. Next, we'll talk about the coating. When you're coating your screens, typically you're going to coat it once on the outside and then once on the inside, and you always want to let the emulsion rest on the outside of your screen. That's why you coat the outside first, then the inside second, which pushes the emulsion to the outside of the mesh. You also want to always let it dry in the down position. Now to build your stencil, you can't coat the screen all at once. You have to do it in steps, because if you coat it all at once with emulsion, the emulsion is going to drip off and fall down and you're going to have a mess. So what we're going to do is coat it 1-in-1, which this screen's already coated. Then we're going to coat it another time on the outside, and then we're going to let it dry again, and then also coat it a 3rd time on the outside. And when we do these multiple coats, there's 2 sides to this scoop coater. It's the thin side or the sharp side, and there's the round side. We're going to be using the sharp side to do the 1-in-1 coating method, and we're going to be using the round side to do the additional coating methods to build up that stencil thickness. If you're setting up on an automatic press, for a long run, you probably want to do a 2-in-2 and then a 2-in-3 for your thicker stencil, which we'll discuss later with multiple screen printing on an automatic versus the manual, where we'll just be using 1 screen. So with this screen, we've already coated it 1-in-1, let it dry, then we coated it another time on the outside using the round side of the scoop coater, and this is going to be a 3rd coat on the outside using the round side of the scoop coater. I didn't put a lot of emulsion in the scoop coater, so I'm just going to let the emulsion slide to the screen surface. And when I'm doing these multiple coats on the outside of the screen, I'm not going to press hard. I'm going to release some of my pressure, because I want the emulsion to more sit on top of it versus pressing into it like I would on a 1-in-1 coating method. So once we got emulsion contact on the mesh right there, We'll do a fairly quick stroke. And our goal for this, I'm not going to do the whole screen, but our goal is going to be thickness. So I really want to lay a lot on. I'm going to do a second one right now to kind of even everything out. And we can see right here, a fairly even coat right throughout the screen right there. And now we'll put it back on the drying rack to dry. Once our emulsion is cured and ready to expose, then it is time to line the artwork up and then go ahead and expose it. Keep in mind, because you are coating the screen 3 or 4 times thicker than you typically coat it, it's going to take longer to dry. You want to make sure that your emulsion is completely cured before you go to expose it, otherwise it won't wash out properly. If your emulsion is still wet on the inside layers of the emulsion, it will peel off, and instead of the image holding, everything will wash out, which is not what you want, obviously. So to test that, you can take your finger, lick it, and your emulsion should feel like plastic. It shouldn't be slimy at all. Once we have ensured that our screen's cured, we'll then come over to our registration table and line up the artwork. This is simple design. We're using 110 mesh screens. This design is a little complicated, but should come out very good on a 110. Let's use some double-sided tape here. Line the artwork up. We have center crop marks, so using a registration table, it makes it really fast and easy to line up. Screen's lined up, ready to go. We'll take it over to our exposure unit. Now, when you come to exposure, just like drying the screen, because you're using a thicker coat of emulsion, it's also going to be a lot longer to expose the screen. So you want to probably, if you're coating a 3-coat method on the back, you probably want to take your exposure time and what you're normally used to doing it, bump it up by 25 or 30% to make sure that the UV rays penetrate all the way through the back of the exposure emulsion. The way you can tell that is during washout. If the emulsion feels slimy at all on the back, that means the back side is not getting exposed. So the next time you do that, you want to increase your exposure time. This screen right here, we're going to expose for about 6 minutes. Once the vacuum sucked all the way down, our screen's ready to expose. Right now it's actually exposing, and once again we're exposing this screen for about 6 minutes. This is a dual cure DXP emulsion. Once our exposure process is done, we'll take the film off the screen and then we'll wash the screen out. Get the screen wet on both sides as usual, but you do want to let it soak for a little bit longer. The emulsion is a lot thicker on these, so they're going to be a little bit harder to wash out. You really want to see your image fully developed on the screen before you go to wash out. You don't want to see drips coming through the screen. So we'll let it sit for about a minute or two, and then we'll come back with pressure and wash it out. Now let's hit it with pressure. When your screen's washed out, you should definitely notice the stencil thickness in the emulsion. Also, you want to let the screen dry, blot with newspaper on the inside to prevent any diazo from dripping back down into the screen, and then also post-harden it for about the same amount of time as you exposed it after you actually let the screen dry. So post-hardening it would be either putting it out in the sun or putting it on your exposure unit.